We tend to believe nowadays that love is an emotion that we should feel, never a skill that we should learn. For example, if I said to you, we should probably study love. We should probably go to a school of love. You go, that's not very romantic. Now, every time that someone says, that's not very romantic, ding, ding, that's normally a sign of a problem. Like, most things that don't sound very romantic are a good idea, and most things that are romantic, like marrying in Vegas after you've met someone for 5 minutes, is not so great. Now, what are we getting wrong? One of the things we're getting wrong is this whole business of instinct, right? So we tend to believe that love will pull us instinctively towards marvelous people that will be correct for us. The old world, people were set up in relationships. You'll marry this person because of this reason, that person goes well with my family, blah, blah. In other words, nothing to do with you, you're put together with someone. Nowadays, we're nominally free to choose anyone. Hooray, fantastic. Aren't we going to make great choices? No. Why don't we make great choices? Because we're not free. Why are we not free? We need to go to a psychotherapist to tell us why we're not free. We're not free to love just anyone. We love in tracks laid down for us by our childhoods. Adult love sits on top of tracks and a script laid down for us in childhood. You might go, what's the problem with that? So what? Well, what's problematic is that many of us had childhoods in which affection was mixed in with more problematic dynamics. That maybe in order to derive love in childhood, we also had to encounter somebody who was in a rage, someone who was violent, someone who was depressed, someone who put us down, someone who preferred another sibling, whatever it was. And we go into adulthood and we find that we're drawn to love stories that feel familiar because they're echoing some of childhood dynamics, but they don't necessarily, for that matter, lead to happiness. And sometimes we have situations where you set up a friend, let's say. You've got a really good friend, and another friend. You think those people would really go well together. You set them up on a date, and then you call them up afterwards. You say, so how did it go? It must have gone really well. They say, I'm not sure. Maybe something was lacking, a little spark. What they're really trying to get at is, they're not going to put it this way. Your friend, this date, did not show me signs that they would make me suffer in the way that I need to suffer in order to feel I'm in love. In other words, this relationship threatened to be happy. That's why I had to go away. So we are paradoxical creatures because our past was not necessarily happy. We're not necessarily that happy that our future romantic lives should be happy either. And this is something that, they weren't thinking about that when love was reinvented 250 years ago.
When people say they have daddy issues and things like this, are you saying then that there's often truth in that? Because they had an early experience with a father figure, a male figure in their life that might have left them or might have, created a anxious attachment style or something. So they then end up pursuing dysfunctional men and relationships because that's the suffering that they associate with love.
Sure. I mean, we repeat what we don't understand. And so long as we're unaware of the stories that we've grown up with, we will enact them in our adult lives. So we're not compelled to do this forever, but, and look, I think a lot of us have a desire to give the stories of our childhood a different ending. Our father might have been a distant and, mean-spirited creature, but also had some good qualities. The dream is to find somebody a bit like that, but to make sure that the story has a good resolution. So it's not merely a desire to repeat, it's a desire to repeat and give a better ending. But frequently, we don't get there. And I think that, look, the thing about psychology is we see all around us people doing so-called crazy things. Falling in love with people who are not going to make them happy, sabotaging their careers, not able to open up to people. And we think we can step back and go, why are they doing that stuff? What's going on? Now, one way to look at it, and it's a kind of compassionate way to look at it, a lot of the stuff that looks crazy now once made a lot of sense. It was once probably a really clever thing to do. If you were growing up, let's say, in an environment in which, let's say a parent was suicidal, right? A parent was suicidal. and you shut down your emotions totally and decided you would never trust anyone. Fantastic. That's a fantastically clever thing to do when you're 5 years old and you've got a suicidal parent, right? Because that will get you through to the next stage of life. If you open your heart at 5 and there's a parent who's suicidal, it'll tear you apart. So good for you. You're doing something brilliantly clever, right? Or imagine somebody who becomes a clown as a child because there's a very sad atmosphere and there's a depression, and all they can have time for is jokes. They're just a manic joker, right? Brilliant. What a fantastic thing for a kid to work out, that they need to be quite a kind of manic joker. But what happens 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, is that what used to be a fantastic defense against an intolerable situation has turned out to more or less ruin people's chances, because the person, with that difficult father will end up never being able to open their heart to anyone, even a very safe person. They won't even know their heart's closed, but they will be acting out the same defensive strategy. Or the person who, it was a great idea to be a bit of a joker early on, but now they have no time for anything serious, and their friends feel that they're a slightly plastic person, can never connect with them. That's a real toll in the adult world. So, very often what we need to do is to say thank you to our younger selves for having devised strategies that really were clever, but at the same time say, thank you, it's enough. I want to live in a different way. That was a fantastic strategy then. It may no longer be the right way for me to live now. Look, we don't need people to be perfect, right? We don't need people to be perfect. At best, we need people to know how they're imperfect and that they can have a chance to warn us of their imperfections in good time before they've done too much damage. There's an enormous difference. I mean, look, again, take the dating idea. Let's imagine, I often say, don't do this to me because we're not on a date. But a great question to ask somebody on a date is, how are you mad? How are you mad? Right? If the person says, I'm not mad, I'm completely sane, run away, because everybody has folly inside them, and we're approaching a measure of everyday tolerable sanity when we've put some flags in the areas of our madness. So total sanity is not a possibility for any human being, but the awareness of where the insanity lies, and a little bit of warning and prompt apology, after an incident, goes a huge long way. People often say, I'm looking for a partner with a good sense of humor. No one needs jokes. It's not about jokes. It's really about modesty about oneself. Right? Somebody who's able to go, take the other thing. If you meet somebody who thinks they're easy to live with, run away. No one's easy to live with. And someone who thinks they're easy to live with is really trouble. So somebody who can put up their hand and go, you know what? Yeah, I'm pretty tricky to live with. Great. That person is safer. Not necessarily totally safe, but they're safer because they've started on the road to self-awareness. And so ultimately, the best we can do in this world is self-awareness, prompt apologies when we slip up. The ancient Greeks had this right. For the ancient Greeks, Plato saw love as a classroom. Beautiful idea. Love is a classroom in which two people, in a spirit of generosity and kindness, we're not talking about shouting here, we're talking about generosity and kindness. Two people endeavor to help each other to become the best version of themselves, of each other, right? That love is geared towards progress and working on yourself. That sounds very odd nowadays. If you went around saying, I've read some Plato and he's kind of guiding me towards the idea that love is a classroom. So therefore, I'm going to give you a 40-minute lecture on some of your flaws. And then I'd like you to give me a 40-minute lecture on some of my flaws. This would be considered, ding, 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 unromantic, right? That's not very romantic, is it? Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. As I say, love is a skill to be learned, not just an emotion to be felt. And some of that means that we might need to go back to school. Come back to the idea of romanticism, right? Romanticism gives us this extraordinary idea that love is something that should be felt and communicated without words, right? So the most romantic the most romantic sentence that often people will say is, I met this person and we didn't even need to speak. We just felt on the same page. Everyone goes, oh, how romantic, ding, ding, danger. Because it's, this leads to a catastrophic outbreak of sulking, right? What is sulking, right? What is a sulk? A sulk is a fascinating pattern of behavior where you get very angry with someone because they have not understood you even though you haven't said anything, they've not understood you, and you get offended because you're a romantic person, you think they can't possibly love me, because true love means understanding somebody, intuitively, wordlessly, and therefore I'm not going to speak. And so, you're coming back from a party with your partner, and they say to you, "Is anything wrong, darling?" And you go, "Mm-mm." Of course there is, but you're not going to tell them. And then they start saying, "Come on, you can tell me what's wrong." And the sulking person goes, "No." And this can go on and on and on. I mean, we've all been at it sometimes. You go home, you go straight upstairs, you go to the bathroom, you shut the door, and then your partner's kind of knocking at the door, going, "Please, darling, just tell me what's wrong." And you go from behind the door, "No." And the reason is that you're a romantic, and you believe that your partner should have miraculous, almost alien capacities to look through the bathroom door into your gnarled and wounded soul to understand what the upset is. But of course they can't, because they're just human. It takes us a long time to realize that other humans are not mind readers. One of the first things we should always ask is, have I told them this? I know I'm upset, but did I tell them this? And so often the answer is not quite, because we're romantics. And so we have to do that really, we can accept it's really boring. We've got to use words. We've got to painfully stack up words and go, the reason that I'm getting a little tetchy is because, and you've got to explain yourself. It's not very romantic, but that is normally a sign it's a good idea.
Can we have true love and total honesty?
I believe that the wish to tell someone absolutely everything is both beautiful and ultimately utopian in a problematic way, because all of us have within us ambivalences, doubts, unfaithful thoughts, etc. And it isn't the work of love to rub your partner constantly up against the most troubling, disturbed sides of your psyche. Now, this is not an advocacy for sort of total mendacity and lies, but it is an advertisement for editing. We should hope that we don't meet the fullest version of each other all the time. I know it sounds romantic, but sometimes it's, as parents know, is it that great as a parent to tell your child absolutely everything about what's going through you? Or sometimes, is there a role for saying, I'm just going to edit myself, not in the name of subterfuge or deceit, but in the name of love, that love could be compatible with an editing of certain aspects of your reality. If I can talk about the mind, why is it that sex is easier at the beginning than in a long-term relationship? One of the leading answers is anger. It's not very easy to have sex or want sex with someone that you're angry with. And in many relationships, there's a lot of stored anger that neither party knows is there. And that anger has come from micro incidents of disappointment. Someone didn't quite call when they said they would. Someone didn't laugh when they might have done. Someone didn't show generosity when it might have been required. And these things get stored up. And the result of too much of this is that you don't want someone going anywhere near you.
Contempt.
Because you're furious. You're essentially furious. But in the way of these things, you don't know you are. You don't know you're furious. Again, the mind is not obvious to itself. So, if you want to have more sex, don't just invest in candles and fancy linen. A quite useful thing to do is to go and have dinner with your partner and say to them, we're both going to ask each other how we've annoyed each other. Because we have annoyed each other, not because we're evil people, but because we're human and we're in a relationship. And no relationship survives more than an hour without a build-up of frustration. And the more we can let out that frustration at the dinner table, the more it won't, create a blockage in the bedroom. And so the chance to discharge frustration. And, often the reason why we don't tell our partners what our frustrations are is that they sound ridiculous. It's like, well, hang on, you're upset with me because I used the word really in what you thought placed too much emphasis on the why when I was speaking to your mother. Are you crazy, right? You are laying yourself open to your partner pointing to you going, are you crazy? But I think that we're all in love, very small children, at least a small part of us is. And as we know, small children get upset about really weird, tiny things. You'll move a button and they start wailing and you go, what's happened? And they go, you moved the button. And you go, I did? And why does that matter? But for them it matters. Or, a pencil has slightly changed direction. So we should remember what it felt like to be a child. And we should acknowledge that there remains, even in an adult who's very competent in all sorts of areas, a small child who is liable to be getting very upset about small things. Triggered. But because they're an adult, this is the problem. We think, well, an adult can't possibly be having such childish reactions. Again, we need to just cast aside our fears of shame and say, you know what? Yes, an adult can get very upset about tiny things. An adult probably is upset about tiny things, and we're doing ourselves an honor when we can dare to reveal this to our partner, and they can do likewise.